Captain Jake Morrison stood in the center of the great crystal chamber and felt very small. The walls around him stretched up so high he could not see the top, and they glowed with soft blue light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. 12 massive shapes sat in a circle around him, and each one was different from the others in ways that hurt his mind to think about. The Zephyrians looked almost human, but their skin was pale blue and their eyes were pure white with no pupils. They did not speak with their mouths, but their words appeared inside his head like someone else's thoughts. The luminary were not solid at all, but were made of bright golden light that shifted and moved like liquid fire. The collective looked like a swarm of tiny metal insects that moved together to form the shape of a person. But Jake could see the empty spaces between them. There were others too. The eternal ones were so old that parts of their bodies had turned to stone. The void speakers were shadows that somehow cast light instead of darkness. The crystal mines were living diamonds that sang instead of talking. Each species had ruled parts of the galaxy for thousands or millions of years, and they all looked at Jake like he was something unpleasant they had found on their shoe. Jake wore his best dress uniform, but it felt cheap and simple compared to the impossible beauty around him. His ship, the UES Defiance, waited outside this place called Nexus Prime, and he knew his crew was watching and hoping. Earth had sent him here to speak for all of humanity and ask for a place among the stars. Now he wished someone else had gotten this job. The prime speaker of the Zephyrians floated forward without moving his legs. His voice filled Jake's mind like cold water. Human representative, we have studied your species for the required observation period. We have watched your worlds and your people, and your crude attempts at civilization. The Galactic Council of Advanced Civilizations has reached a decision about your future. Jake straightened his shoulders and tried to look confident, even though his heart was beating so fast he thought everyone could probably hear it. We're ready to hear what you have to say. Humanity is eager to join the galactic community and contribute whatever we can. A sound like breaking glass came from the crystal mines, and Jake realized they were laughing. The luminary grew brighter and their light felt hot on his face. The collective buzzed and hummed in a way that made his teeth ache. The prime speaker raised one pale hand and the chamber became silent. Contribute. Yes, that is what all young species believe they can do, but you misunderstand your place in the cosmic order, human. You are not here to contribute. You are here to receive judgment. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. This was not how the meeting was supposed to go. Earth's best diplomats had prepared him for negotiations and trade talks and cultural exchanges. Nobody had mentioned judgment. Your species has existed for less than 1 million years, the prime speaker continued. You have had what you call civilization for less than 10,000 years. You have traveled between stars for less than 50 years. By galactic standards, you are not even infants. You are barely a possibility. One of the eternal ones spoke, and its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. We have seen 1,000 species like yours rise from their birth worlds. Most destroy themselves before they learn wisdom. A few survive long enough to become useful. None have impressed us. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced it down. Getting mad would not help humanity now. We know we're young compared to you. We know we have a lot to learn, but we've survived wars and plagues and disasters that could have ended us. We've explored our solar system and built cities and created art and music and literature. We've sent signals into space hoping to find others like us, and now we have. Doesn't that count for something? The void speakers laughed, and their laughter was the sound of empty space. Art and music and literature. How charmingly primitive. Do you think the universe cares about your songs, human? Do you think the stars are moved by your poems? Your species burns through resources like a fire burns through dry grass, said another voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You wage constant war against each other over trivial differences. You poison your own world and call it progress. You create weapons capable of destroying everything you have built and then make more of them. You are exactly what we expected from a young and foolish race. Jake wanted to argue, but he knew they were not completely wrong. Humanity did have problems, big problems, but they also had hope and dreams and the willingness to try new things even when they failed. How could he explain that to beings who had lived forever and seen everything? We're not perfect, he said finally, but we're trying to be better. Every generation of humans has been a little bit better than the one before. We learn from our mistakes and we keep growing and changing. Isn't that what matters? Isn't that what you want from a species that joins your council? The prime speaker's white eyes seemed to look right through him. What we want, human, is order, stability, predictability. Your species represents chaos. You cannot even agree among yourselves about the most basic questions of existence. How can you contribute to a civilization that has maintained peace for 3 million years? The decision of this council is final, the Eternal One announced. Humanity is declared cosmically irrelevant. You are too young, too primitive, and too violent to contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. You will be granted one star system as a reservation. You will not expand beyond these borders. You will not contact other species without permission. You will remain quarantined until you evolve into something useful, or extinguish yourselves as most young species do. The words fell on Jake like heavy stones. Everything Earth had hoped for and dreamed about was being taken away with a few sentences. All the people back home who believed humanity could take its place among the stars would have to hear that they were considered irrelevant. You have one rotation of your home world to remove all human presence from systems beyond your designated reservation, the Prime Speaker continued. Any violation of these terms will result in forced compliance. Do not test our resolve, human. Species that have tried to defy the Council's judgment no longer exist. Jake stood there, in the crystal chamber, surrounded by beings older than human civilization, and felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. But somewhere deep inside, a small flame of defiance still burned. These ancient species might think they knew everything about humanity, but they were wrong about one thing. Humans did not give up easily, and they did not stay down when someone knocked them over. I understand your decision, Jake said, and his voice was steady even though his hands were shaking. I'll carry your message back to Earth, but I want you to remember something. You're judging us by what we are right now, not by what we might become. Every species in this chamber was young once. Every one of you was probably told by someone older that you didn't matter. Maybe you should think about that before you decide our future. The Prime Speaker's face did not change, but something flickered in those white eyes. Your ship will be escorted to the boundary of your reservation, human. Do not return to Nexus Prime. The next time we meet, your species will either be worthy of respect or it will be extinct. The stars will decide which. Jake turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. Behind him, he could hear the ancient beings already talking about other matters as if humanity had never existed at all. But they were wrong about humans, and someday they would find out just how wrong they were. 5 years had passed since Captain Jake Morrison returned to Earth with news that changed everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. The Galactic Council had spoken, and their words still echoed in the halls of every government building on the planet. Irrelevant, quarantined, primitive. Those words had hit humanity like a slap across the face, but instead of crushing their spirit, they had done something else entirely. Admiral Lisa Hayes stood in the command center of Luna Base and watched the displays that showed what humanity had built in those 5 years. The screens were filled with data that would have amazed the Council if they had bothered to look, but their monitoring systems were designed to watch for the kind of threats they understood. Massive fleets, weapons of obvious destruction, territorial expansion. They were not watching for what humanity was actually doing. Show me the Mars facilities, Lisa said to the technician at the main console. The young woman's fingers moved across holographic controls, and the display changed to show the red planet that was no longer quite so red. Green patches were spreading across the surface where atmospheric processors had been working day and night for 3 years. Cities were rising from the dust, and they were not like anything the galaxy had seen before. Dr. Ben Parker had solved problems that had puzzled humanity for decades. His breakthrough in quantum mechanics had come from studying the energy signatures of the Council ships. The aliens used technology that worked by forcing reality to follow strict mathematical rules. But Ben had discovered something they missed. Reality did not like being forced, and it always pushed back. Human technology learned to work with those pushes instead of against them. The result was machines that seemed to think for themselves. Manufacturing centers that could redesign their own processes. Power generators that became more efficient the longer they ran. Computers that grew smarter by making mistakes and learning from them. The Council's surveillance systems saw these advances as minor improvements to primitive technology. They had no idea that humanity was building the foundation for something entirely new. Engineer Kate Sullivan had taken Ben's theories and turned them into reality. Her self-replicating construction systems could take raw materials from asteroids and turn them into anything humanity needed. Ships, stations, weapons, tools. The systems worked by breaking every rule the galaxy thought was important. Instead of following detailed blueprints, they made decisions based on what seemed like random chance. Instead of building the same thing every time, they created variations and improvements. The Council's watchers saw mining operations and simple construction projects. They did not see that every asteroid being hollowed out became the shell for a new kind of spacecraft. They did not see that every research station was also a weapons platform. They did not see that humanity was building a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever imagined. Commander Ryan Bell oversaw the military side of what they called Project Wildcard. His ships looked like cargo haulers and mining vessels to outside observers, but they were something much more dangerous. Each one was designed to be taken apart and put back together in different configurations. A mining ship could become a fighter in minutes. A cargo hauler could turn into a heavy cruiser. A research vessel could become a carrier launching smaller ships that had been built inside its hidden bays. The weapons were just as unconventional. Instead of the energy beams and particle cannons that galactic militaries used, humans had developed something based on chaos theory. Their weapons created unpredictable patterns of destruction that could not be defended against because they followed no rules. A target might be hit by kinetic projectiles, or energy bursts or gravitational distortions, or all three at once in combinations that changed every second. But the most important part of Project Wildcard was not the ships or the weapons. It was the information that Captain Amy Foster and her reconnaissance teams were gathering. Amy had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the solar system. She led missions beyond the quarantine zone using ships so small and quiet that the Council's sensors could not detect them. What Amy found in the dark spaces between stars made her blood run cold. The Council was hiding something. Ancient ruins on dead worlds, debris fields where entire civilizations had been destroyed. Warning beacons broadcasting messages in languages so old that even the Council had forgotten how to read them. Something had been killing species in this galaxy for millions of years, and the Council knew about it. The pattern was always the same. A young race would develop faster than light travel and start exploring. They would find other species and trade with them and learn from them. They would grow stronger and smarter and begin to think they understood how the universe worked. Then something would come out of the dark and wipe them out completely, leaving only ruins and warnings that nobody listened to. Amy's team had traced the destruction back to its source at the edge of the galaxy. There in the cold, empty spaces between galaxies, something was waiting. Her long-range sensors could barely detect it, but what they found was impossible to believe. Structures the size of solar systems. Technology that made the Council's ancient wisdom look like stone tools. Machine intelligences that had been dormant for eons but were beginning to stir. She called them the Devourers because that was what they did. They consumed entire civilizations and used the energy to grow stronger. The Council knew they existed and they knew they would return someday. But they had convinced themselves that their quarantine systems and peaceful isolation would protect them. They were wrong. The Devourers were not like the young, aggressive species that the Council was used to dealing with. They were patient. They were thorough. They adapted to any defense and learned from every encounter. When they finally moved against the galaxy, they would be unstoppable using conventional tactics. The Council's millions of years of experience would mean nothing against an enemy that had been watching and learning for longer than any of their civilizations had existed. Lisa Hayes read Amy's reports and understood what they meant. Humanity had been declared irrelevant by a council that was itself irrelevant in the face of what was coming. The ancient species had grown comfortable in their power and wisdom, but comfort made you soft. Wisdom could become rigidity. Power could become weakness if you forgot how to use it properly. Humans remembered how to fight because they had never stopped fighting. Every generation had faced wars and disasters and challenges that tested them. They had learned to be adaptable because their world was dangerous and unpredictable. They had learned to think creatively because following the rules was not always enough to survive. The Council thought humanity was too chaotic and violent to contribute to galactic civilization. They were about to discover that chaos and violence were exactly what the galaxy needed to survive what was coming. Jake Morrison was no longer just a captain. Admiral Morrison now commanded the entire human fleet, and he spent his days preparing for a war that nobody else knew was coming. His ships were hidden throughout the solar system and beyond. His crews trained for scenarios that seemed impossible. His engineers built weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. When Amy brought word that the Devourers were finally moving, Jake was ready. The enemy had waited millions of years for the galaxy to grow fat and complacent. They had watched species rise and fall and learned from each encounter. They thought they knew everything there was to know about how civilizations fought and died. They had never seen anything like humanity before. They were about to learn why the Council's declaration of irrelevance was the biggest mistake anyone had ever made. The stars had been waiting for a species crazy enough to fight the impossible fight and win it, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy was about to discover that being irrelevant was exactly what made humanity relevant when everything else had given up hope. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Outer Rim monitoring station on the edge of Zephyrian space. Commander Velkoth had been watching the silent darkness between galaxies for 300 years, and nothing had ever changed. The void was empty and cold and dead, just as it had always been. Then one day the sensors began detecting movement where movement should not exist. At first, Velkoth thought it was equipment failure. The monitoring station was old even by galactic standards, and its technology had not been updated in millennia. Why would it need to be? Nothing ever happened in the empty spaces, but when he ran diagnostics, everything checked out perfectly. Something really was moving out there in the darkness, and it was moving toward the galaxy. The objects were still too far away to get clear readings, but they were massive, larger than planets, larger than anything the galaxy had ever built. They moved with purpose and direction as if they knew exactly where they were going. When Velkoth sent his report to the Council, he expected them to dispatch investigation fleets immediately. Instead, he received a message telling him to maintain his watch and report any further developments. The Council was not taking the threat seriously. They had seen false alarms before. Young species often imagined enemies in the darkness when they first learned to scan deep space. Primitive sensors frequently misinterpreted natural phenomena as artificial constructs. The wise approach was to wait and gather more information before causing unnecessary panic. But Velkoth was not young, and his sensors were not primitive. He had been trained by the finest minds in Zephyrian space, and his equipment was maintained by the best technicians in the galaxy. When he said something was coming, the Council should have listened. Their failure to take his warning seriously would cost millions of lives. The Devourers emerged from the void 3 months later, and they did not come alone. Thousands of ships poured into the outer systems like a black tide, washing over everything in their path. But these were not ships in any sense that the galaxy understood. They were living machines that grew and adapted as they moved. They consumed everything they encountered and used the matter to build more of themselves. The first world to fall was New Vega, a small luminary colony with a population of 50 million beings. The Devourers surrounded the planet and began their harvest. Energy beams reached down from orbit and touched the surface. Where the beams landed, everything simply disappeared. Buildings, people, animals, plants. The very rock and soil were broken down into their component atoms and drawn up into the waiting ships. Within 6 hours, New Vega was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Nothing remained but empty space where a world had once been. The Devourers had consumed everything, including the planet itself, and used the mass to construct more harvesting vessels. The colony's desperate distress calls reached the nearest Council fleet 2 days too late. Admiral Zek Theron of the Luminary Defense Force was the first military commander to face the Devourers in battle. He commanded a fleet of 200 vessels representing the finest technology the galaxy had to offer. His ships were equipped with energy shields that could stop any known weapon. His weapons could crack planets and destroy moons. His tactical computers contained the collected wisdom of 3 million years of warfare. None of it mattered. The Devourers studied his fleet for exactly 17 minutes. Then they attacked using weapons and tactics that should not have been possible. Energy beams that ignored shields and passed through armor as if it were not there. Projectiles that changed course in flight to follow evasive maneuvers. Boarding pods that somehow appeared inside sealed ships without passing through the hull. But the worst part was how quickly the enemy adapted. Every weapon the Luminari used worked exactly once. The second time they fired the same type of weapon, the Devourers had already developed a defense. By the third shot, the enemy was using modified versions of the Luminari's own weapons against them. Within an hour, Zek Theron's fleet was scattered wreckage, and the Admiral himself was dead. The Council finally began to take the threat seriously, but by then, it was too late to stop the invasion. System after system fell to the advancing darkness. The Zephyrians tried to use their telepathic networks to coordinate galactic defenses, but the Devourers hacked into their mental connections and turned their greatest strength into a weakness. Corrupted thought spread through the telepathic web like a virus, driving entire populations insane. The collective attempted to overwhelm the invaders with sheer numbers. Their hive mind could coordinate billions of individual units in perfect harmony, but the Devourers had fought hive minds before. They understood how collective intelligence worked, and they knew how to break it. Targeted strikes at key nodes caused cascading failures throughout the collective's network. Within days, the greatest coordinated intelligence in the galaxy had shattered into confused fragments. The Eternal Ones tried to use their ancient knowledge to find weapons that could harm the invaders. They searched through libraries that contained the accumulated wisdom of 100 dead civilizations. But everything they found was already known to the Devourers. Every tactic had been tried before. Every weapon had been countered. Every defense had been broken. The enemy had been learning for millions of years, and they had learned well. One by one, the great civilizations of the galaxy fell before the advancing tide. Worlds that had stood for eons were consumed in hours. Fleets that had never known defeat were scattered like leaves in a storm. Technologies that had seemed impossible to overcome were casually brushed aside by an enemy that adapted faster than anyone could imagine. Prime Speaker Zaltharon watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy and felt something he had not experienced in 1,000 years. Fear. Not just concern or worry, but genuine terror at the scope of what they were facing. The Devourers were not just another enemy to be defeated with superior technology and tactics. They were the ending of everything the galaxy had built. In desperation, the Council sent out a call to every known species in the galaxy. Ancient rivals put aside their differences. Proud civilizations swallowed their pride and begged for help. Even the youngest and most primitive races were contacted because any help was better than none. The message went out to every corner of known space, including one small yellow star on the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm. The response from Sol System was not what anyone expected. Instead of an immediate offer of assistance or a desperate plea for more information, humanity sent back a single word. Maybe. It was signed by Admiral Jake Morrison, who had once stood before the Council and been told his species was irrelevant. Zaltharon felt anger rising in his mind despite the desperate situation. How dare these primitive humans hesitate when the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance? Did they not understand that this threat could destroy them as easily as any other species? Were they so foolish as to think their isolation would protect them? But then he remembered something Jake Morrison had said 5 years ago. "You're judging us by what we are right now, not by what we might become." The human had also said something about every species being young once and being told they did not matter. At the time, those words had seemed like the desperate protests of a species too primitive to accept its place in the cosmic order. Now they sounded like something else entirely. Like a warning that the Council had been too proud to hear. Zaltharon began to wonder if humanity's apparent delay was not hesitation but preparation. What if the species the Council had dismissed as irrelevant had been getting ready for something like this? The answer came 3 days later when Admiral Morrison sent a longer message. "We have been watching the situation develop. We know what you are facing and we know why your standard tactics are failing. The Devourers are not invaders. They are harvesters. They have done this before to countless other galaxies. They learn from every encounter and adapt to every defense. Your civilizations have grown powerful through order and stability, but that has made you predictable. The enemy knows how you think and how you fight because they have faced countless species exactly like you. What they have never encountered is genuine chaos. What they have never faced is an enemy that breaks every rule of civilized warfare. We will help you, but only if you accept that this war cannot be won using conventional methods. We will need complete operational freedom to fight the way humans fight. We will need you to trust us even when our actions seem insane. Most importantly, you will need to accept that the galaxy as you know it is already gone. What we are fighting for now is the chance to build something new." Zaltharon read the message 3 times before he understood what the humans were really saying. They were not offering to save the galaxy. They were offering to rebuild it from the ashes of what was about to be lost. The species the Council had declared irrelevant was now their only hope for relevance in whatever came next. The first human ships to engage the Devourers were nothing like what the Council expected. Instead of massive battle cruisers, Admiral Morrison sent small, fast vessels that looked more like cargo runners than warships. Each ship carried a crew of less than 20 humans and weapons that seemed almost primitive compared to the energy cannons and particle beams the galaxy was used to seeing. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Hughes commanded the lead squadron of 12 ships that intercepted a Devourer harvesting fleet in the Kepler system. The enemy force consisted of 30 vessels, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls were covered with adaptive armor that had already learned to deflect every type of weapon the galaxy possessed. Their sensors could track objects across light years, and their computers could calculate 1 million battle scenarios in seconds. Sam ignored everything the tactical manuals said about engaging superior forces. Instead of coordinating a massed attack or attempting to exploit enemy weaknesses, his ships scattered in all directions and began doing things that made no sense at all. One ship started broadcasting old Earth music at maximum power. Another began launching empty cargo containers filled with random debris. A third ship flew in lazy circles while its crew played games and told jokes over open comm channels. The Devourer fleet responded exactly as their programming dictated. They analyzed each human action and adapted their systems to counter whatever threat they perceived. They developed filters to block the music. They tracked and destroyed the cargo containers. They calculated intercept courses for the circling ship. Their learning algorithms worked perfectly, updating their tactical databases with new information about human behavior. That was exactly what Sam had been hoping for. While the Devourers were busy adapting to nonsensical behavior, the real attack was already underway. Each human ship was equipped with a new type of weapon that Dr. Ellen Rodriguez had developed based on quantum uncertainty principles. The weapons did not fire energy or matter. They fired possibilities. A quantum torpedo might arrive at its target as a kinetic projectile or an energy burst or a gravitational anomaly or something else entirely. The weapon itself did not know what it would become until the moment it made contact. The Devourer's adaptive systems could not prepare for an attack when the attack did not know what it was going to be. The effect was devastating. Devourer ships that had survived every conventional assault began taking damage they could not understand or counter. Their armor adapted to deflect kinetic impacts just as quantum torpedoes decided to become energy weapons. Their shields adjusted to absorb energy attacks just as the next wave of torpedoes became gravity bombs. Every defensive adaptation made them more vulnerable to the next completely different attack. But Sam's squadron was doing more than just fighting. They were teaching. Every action they took was designed to feed false information into the Devourer learning networks. The music and jokes and random behavior were all part of a carefully planned deception. The enemy computers were learning that humans were chaotic and unpredictable when in reality they were following a very specific plan. Dr. Rodriguez had spent months studying, captured Devourer technology, and she had found their greatest weakness. The learning algorithms that made them so dangerous also made them vulnerable to the right kind of misinformation. If you could trick them into learning the wrong lessons, their own adaptation systems would work against them. The Kepler engagement lasted for 6 hours, and when it was over, the Devourer fleet was completely destroyed. Not a single human ship had been lost, and the crews were already analyzing the enemy wreckage for more information about how their systems worked. The galaxy watched in amazement as a handful of primitive human vessels accomplished what entire fleets of advanced ships had failed to. Tar Captain Tony Mitchell's squadron demonstrated another aspect of human warfare that confused both allies and enemies. Instead of trying to preserve their ships and minimize casualties, the humans seemed almost eager to sacrifice themselves in ways that accomplished tactical objectives. Tony's crews had developed techniques that violated every principle of civilized combat. When conventional weapons failed to penetrate Devourer armor, Tony's ships would ram the enemy vessels at high speed. But these were not desperate suicide attacks. The human ships were designed to survive the collision and keep fighting. Their modular construction allowed damaged sections to be jettisoned, while the remaining parts continued to function. A ship that started the battle as a cruiser might end it as a fighter, but it would still be fighting. The humans also used their environment in ways that shocked galactic observers. Tony's pilots would deliberately fly into asteroid fields and use the rocks as weapons. They would position enemy ships between themselves and nearby stars, then trigger solar flares using carefully placed explosives. They would hide inside gas giant atmospheres and use the planet's magnetic field to disrupt enemy sensors. Most disturbing of all, they would use the Devourer's own adaptation systems against them. Human ships would deliberately allow themselves to be scanned and analyzed, while broadcasting false information about their capabilities. When the enemy adapted to counter weapons that did not exist, they became vulnerable to the weapons the humans actually carried. Commander Ellen Foster led the Psychological Warfare Division, and her techniques were perhaps the most effective of all. The Devourers had never encountered an enemy that fought with emotions and instincts instead of pure logic. Their computers could analyze tactical patterns and weapon signatures, but they could not understand why humans would sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor or freedom. Ellen's teams would broadcast human music and poetry and art directly into Devourer communication networks. The enemy systems tried to analyze these transmissions for hidden military intelligence, but found only chaotic expressions of emotion and creativity. The alien computers began developing processing errors as they attempted to find logical patterns in fundamentally illogical data. The effect spread through the Devourer networks like a virus. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated began making irrational decisions. Fleets that had moved with machine precision started breaking formation for no apparent reason. The more the enemy computers tried to understand human culture, the more confused and erratic their behavior became. Admiral Morrison coordinated these scattered actions into a larger strategy that slowly began turning the tide of war. Instead of trying to hold territory or protect specific systems, the humans focused on disrupting Devourer learning networks. They would attack supply lines and communication relays. They would spread false information and contradictory data. They would make the enemy's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The Council watched these unconventional tactics with growing amazement and horror. The humans were winning, but they were doing it by abandoning everything the galaxy considered civilized warfare. They used deception and misdirection. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation. They targeted enemy psychology rather than just enemy ships. They fought like barbarians, and somehow that was exactly what the situation required. Prime Speaker Zaltharon received reports of human victories across a dozen star systems and struggled to understand how such primitive tactics could be so effective. The answer came from his own analysts who had studied human behavior during the 5 years of quarantine. Humans had never stopped fighting each other, and that constant conflict had taught them things that peaceful galactic civilizations had forgotten. They knew how to adapt quickly to changing conditions because their own history was filled with rapid change. They knew how to fight against superior technology because they had often been the ones with inferior equipment. Most importantly, they knew how to win through sheer stubborn determination even when logic said they should surrender. The Devourers had conquered countless galaxies by learning from their enemies and adapting to every defensive strategy, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to follow any strategy at all. They had never encountered a species that treated war not as a science but as an art form where creativity mattered more than logic. As reports continued to arrive from the front lines, Zaltharon began to understand that the Council's declaration of human irrelevance had been more than just wrong. It had been catastrophically stupid. The very qualities that made humans seem primitive and chaotic were exactly what the galaxy needed to survive its greatest crisis. The stars had been waiting for a species crazy enough to fight impossible odds and win through pure bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. Humanity had arrived at exactly the right moment, and they were teaching the galaxy that sometimes being uncivilized was the most civilized thing you could do. The final battle began in the galactic core where ancient stars burned with the light of dying civilizations. The Devourer mothership hung in space like a metal planet surrounded by the combined fleets of every remaining species in the galaxy. Zephyrian vessels glowed with telepathic energy. Luminary ships blazed like captured stars. The collective swarm formations stretched across light years. Even the proud Eternal Ones had brought their oldest and most powerful warships to this last desperate fight. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched 2,000 Allied vessels prepare for what everyone knew would be the final engagement of the war. The enemy mothership was larger than anything anyone had imagined possible. Its hull was covered with processing centers that had consumed the matter of entire star systems. Its weapons could crack planets, and its shields had adapted to deflect every type of attack the galaxy could produce. The plan was simple in concept and insane in execution. The Allied fleets would keep the mothership's attention, while a small human force attempted to penetrate its defenses and strike at its core systems. Every simulation said the mission was impossible. The enemy's adaptive technology would counter any assault within minutes. No conventional attack could succeed against defenses that learned and evolved in real time. That was why Jake had brought only 50 ships to face an enemy the size of a small world. The rest of humanity's fleet was hidden throughout the galaxy, protecting Earth and the other human colonies from whatever came next. These 50 vessels represented humanity's final gambit, and the crews aboard them knew they were not coming home. Commander Ryan Bell led the first wave of human ships toward the mothership's outer defenses. His vessels looked small and fragile compared to the massive Devourer constructs, but they carried something the enemy had never encountered before. Dr. Ben Parker had solved the final piece of the quantum weapons puzzle. Instead of firing possibilities at the enemy, they were going to fire impossibilities. The new weapons did not exist in normal space-time. They fired shots that arrived before they were launched. They created effects without causes and causes without effects. The Devourer adaptation systems tried to analyze these attacks but found nothing to analyze. How do you defend against a weapon that breaks the fundamental laws of physics? But the impossible weapons were only a distraction. The real attack was already inside the mothership's defenses in ways that no conventional sensor could detect. Dr. Ellen Rodriguez had discovered that the Devourer's greatest weakness was not technological but conceptual. Their entire civilization was based on logic and predictability. They could not process truly random input without suffering catastrophic system failures. Captain Amy Foster led a team of volunteers who had undergone a procedure that would have horrified the Council if they had known about it. Human consciousness had been merged with quantum computers using technology that existed at the very edge of what was possible. The volunteers were no longer entirely human, and they were no longer entirely machine. They were something new that could exist in both physical and digital space simultaneously. Amy and her team did not attack the mothership from outside. They attacked it from within its own computer networks. Their consciousness flowed through data streams and processing centers like a virus made of pure human thought. Everywhere they went, they left. Chaos and contradiction and the kind of random creativity that only human minds could produce. The Devourer systems tried to isolate and eliminate the intrusion, but found that they were fighting something that did not follow any rules they understood. Human consciousness was not logical. It was emotional and intuitive and completely unpredictable. When Amy's team encountered defensive programs, they did not try to defeat them. They told them jokes and sang them songs and showed them works of art that made the alien software crash from pure confusion. The effect spread through the mothership's networks like wildfire. Processing centers that had functioned perfectly for millions of years began producing random outputs. Weapon systems fired at empty space. Shield generators created openings in their own defenses. The adaptive algorithms that were supposed to learn from every encounter instead began learning from dreams and nightmares and human memories of first love and childhood fears. But the price of victory was higher than anyone had imagined. The quantum merger process was irreversible and fatal. Every human who entered the Devourer networks knew they were sacrificing not just their lives but their very existence. They would not die in any conventional sense. They would simply cease to be as their consciousness dispersed through infinite digital dimensions. Amy felt herself beginning to fragment as her mind touched the very core of the mothership's intelligence. The central processing unit was vast beyond comprehension, containing the accumulated knowledge and experience of every civilization the Devourers had ever consumed. She could see the thoughts and memories of 1 million dead species, and she understood at last why the galaxy had been so helpless against this enemy. The Devourers were not just machines. They were the preserved consciousness of every race they had defeated. Every tactical innovation and every defensive strategy was stored in their memory banks. They knew how every galactic civilization fought because they had absorbed the minds of those civilizations' greatest military leaders. They were not just learning from their enemies. They were their enemies, but they had never absorbed a human mind before. They had never tried to process the kind of chaotic creativity that defined humanity. As Amy's consciousness merged with the mothership's core, she brought with her every contradiction and paradox that made humans unique. hope in the face of despair, humor in the face of death, love without logic, faith without proof. The Central Intelligence tried to understand these concepts and failed catastrophically. Its processing systems were designed to find patterns and create order, but human emotions were fundamentally orderless. The harder it tried to analyze what it was experiencing, the more confused and erratic its responses became. Other human volunteers were making similar sacrifices throughout the mothership's networks. Commander. Bell's consciousness became a virus of determination that spread through the enemy's tactical systems. Dr. Parker's mind became a paradox generator that caused logical loops in the adaptation algorithms. One by one, the bravest members of humanity gave up their existence to poison the very foundations of devourer intelligence. The mothership began to shut down not from physical damage, but from conceptual overload. Its weapons fell silent. Its shields collapsed. Its processing centers entered recursive loops as they tried to understand why humans would sacrifice themselves for people they had never met. The Central Intelligence that had coordinated the destruction of countless civilizations simply stopped functioning as it encountered questions it could not answer. Why do humans fight for things that do not logically matter? Why do they risk their lives for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity? Why do they choose hope when despair makes more sense? Why do they love when love only leads to loss? The Devourer Intelligence processed these questions for exactly 17 seconds before concluding that they were impossible to answer and therefore impossible to exist. Since the questions clearly did exist but could not exist, the central processor entered a logical paradox from which it could not escape. The error cascaded through every connected system, causing a chain reaction that spread across the entire Devourer fleet. Within minutes, every enemy vessel in the galaxy had gone silent as their shared intelligence network collapsed under the weight of human impossibility. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy mothership go dark and felt no sense of victory. Too many good people had died to make this moment possible. Amy Foster and Ryan Bell and hundreds of others had given up everything to save a galaxy that had called them irrelevant. The price of relevance had been paid in human lives and human souls. Prime Speaker Zal Theron contacted the human fleet with a message of gratitude and an offer that had once seemed impossible. The Galactic Council wanted to offer humanity full membership and a seat among the ruling species of the galaxy. They wanted to apologize for their earlier judgment and acknowledge that humanity had saved them all. Jake Morrison's response was simple and devastating. "We don't want to rule anyone. We never did. We just wanted to explore and learn and help when help was needed. You could have had us as friends and allies 5 years ago, but you chose to see us as primitives and barbarians. Now that we've proven ourselves in blood, you want to welcome us as equals. That's not how friendship works. The galaxy as you knew it is gone. The Devourers destroyed too much and too many people died while you were learning to respect us. What comes next will be different. It will be messier and less orderly and probably less peaceful, but it will be honest and it will be real, and maybe that's better than what you had before." The quarantine was lifted. Not because the Council decided to lift it, but because it no longer mattered. Human ships spread across the galaxy, carrying supplies to devastated worlds and hope to broken civilizations. They brought with them music and art and literature, and the radical idea that strength came not from perfection, but from the willingness to keep trying after you failed.